enter into communion, I want us to enter into the written word and think about this passage this morning together before we break bread. I want us to turn to Mark chapter 9, the story that is found here, beginning with verse 14. This story happens right after Jesus and his three inner circle disciples had this marvelous Transfiguration mountaintop experience, and they are coming back at the bottom of the mountain to where the other disciples are, and this is what they encounter. Verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth and gnashes his teeth and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus. "Everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet. He stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out, Jesus?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer," and in some translations, prayer and fasting. A very interesting story indeed. Let's go back to the very beginning of the story. And now I'm going to read this with some commentary. So we go back to the beginning of the story in verse 14. And it says that when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. What were they arguing about, like Jesus asks? Well, partly because they couldn't drive out the demon. This father brings a son, they couldn't drive. They had thrown out demons before. Jesus had sent out the 12, and they've gone and they preached, they healed people, they drove out demons, they came back rejoicing, and suddenly they couldn't do it. And so it could be that the demon himself ridiculed the disciples. Sometimes that could happen. It turned on them and started mocking them. And then maybe to make matters worse, the Pharisees and the scribes were there, and they began to mock them and say, see, you can't do it. And so everyone was beginning to turn on them, and the disciples were overwhelmed. Just like the Father. The Father brought the Son because why? He was overwhelmed. And the disciples here are overwhelmed. What do the disciples do? Do they pray? No. What do? They argue. They argue. Is that what you should do when you are overwhelmed? They argue. Does that heal the boy? Let me just tell you something, my brothers and sisters. Arguing never benefits anyone. Never benefits anything. You never convince anyone of anything. You never heal anybody with arguing. Arguing is absolutely useless. And this is what they're doing. Doesn't help the father, doesn't help the boy. But we love to argue sometimes. But let us remember, arguing never does any good. Next verse. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, what happens? They were overwhelmed with wonder, and they ran to greet him. I don't know whether it's because Jesus and the disciples just had that mountaintop experience, but when they came, their faces had a glow. And when the people saw Jesus, the arguing, what happened? Stopped. Just stopped. And people were like, they were overcome with wonder as they went to greet Jesus. Isn't that great? Isn't that what should happen? Instead of arguing, we should enter the presence of Jesus. We should invite Jesus to come into whatever we are doing, right? And the presence of Jesus will do more than anything that we are arguing about. And so everybody's at awe with the presence of Jesus. He says, what are you arguing about? The man said, oh, teacher, I brought you my son who's possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Again, here is this father who is overwhelmed and he doesn't know what to do. And so, one thing he does well, does good here, is that he brings his son to Jesus. He says, whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. What does this mean? Very simply, brothers and sisters, the flesh is no match for the spirit. And let me just tell you, this world, it may not seem like it, but it's full of spirit. And Paul says what? We battle not against flesh and blood. We battle against principalities and powers, right? This world is full of spirit and powers. So don't think that you can overcome these things with the flesh. The flesh is helpless in a world full of powerful spirits. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. They brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, immediately threw the boy into convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has this been? It's kind of an interesting question Jesus asked, like he doesn't know. But he asks it anyway. And he says, from childhood, it has thrown him into the fire, water to kill him. Right here, it is very clear that this is the ultimate intent of the devil. If you ever wonder, sometimes the devil lures us with the riches of the world and with fun and with things that are nice. But ultimately, if the devil has his way, what happens? He is there to kill, to torment, and to kill. Make no question about that. That is the devil's ultimate goal, because he knows he is going down, and he wants to take as many down with him as he can. And now here is where the Father makes a big mistake. He sticks his foot in his mouth. Have you ever done that? Say something that you really shouldn't have said. And the Father here, I don't know if he knew what he was going to say, but he makes a big mistake. He says, but if you can do anything, never say that to Jesus, okay? If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus' reply is what? This is very, to me, this is very humorous that Jesus here, he pauses everything and says, what did you just say? What did you just say to me? If you can? Jesus was kind of offended by that. And he says, everything is possible for one who believes. So the currency in heaven is what? Believing, right? It's faith. How do you buy stuff from heaven's miracle store? The currency is faith. It's believing, according to Jesus. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, now here it is, the father, he realizes he made a big faux pas here. He really made a mistake. And he does good. He corrects it. He fixes his mistake. And this is what's important. We all make mistakes, but we have to realize that we can't fix it. He says, I do believe. He realized, the father says, I do believe. But then he says, help me overcome my unbelief. This is a wonderful prayer. Wonderful prayer. And this is what Mrs. White has to say about this prayer. To him that overcometh, to me I will no wise cast out. Cast yourself at his feet with the cry, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. You can never perish while you do this. Never. Do you want to know how you can guarantee your salvation? By earnestly and sincerely praying this prayer. Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. Because God will never, never reject or turn away someone who acknowledges their weakness, comes humbly, and asks for help. Never. It's great. 25, when Jesus saw that a crowd was beginning to grow, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. What is this saying? The spirit, that the flesh is no match for the spirit, but the devil is no match for Jesus, for God. That's the great news. Amen? Yes. That's an amen. Yes, the flesh is no match for the spirit, but the devil and the spirits are no match for God and Jesus. And the spirit shrieked and came out of him. Jesus took him by the hand. And the disciples asked him later on privately, why couldn't we drive him out? They were just distraught. They were disturbed as to why they couldn't. And Jesus' reply is simply, this kind can only come out by prayer. We'll talk about prayer a little bit later on. But I just want to, this is kind of today's story is that passage and sermon here is it's a little bit of a belated Father's Day sermon. Okay? My dad, when I was growing up, I always believed and thought my dad was a strong man. I think all little, young sons or daughters think of their dad usually as a strong person. But my dad was on the muscular side. He was tall, kind of like me, but he was a little bigger. And so I always thought he was a strong, strong guy. And I felt very secure in his presence. One time we went fishing, and he caught this stingray. It was a little one, baby one, and he was trying to unhook it, and the stinger came and stung him in the thumb. And as a little boy, I was like, it's not good, and there was blood coming out in his thumb and stuff. But he didn't show it. I mean, he was as stoic as could be. He just pulled the thing out, did thing. But I could tell he was in pain. But if it was me, I'd be like, ah! That would be me. But not my dad. My dad was like, no emotion. Afterwards, we go to the store. He buys his painkiller, bottle of painkiller. You're supposed to take like 2, maybe. He just pours this thing, pours a handful, and he just gulps this thing down. And I'm like, as a little boy, I'm just amazed. And the next day, he just continues on like, he's fine. And as a boy, I'm going, wow. I was just very impressed with my dad. But here's the thing. As I started getting older, I began to notice my dad was not as strong as I thought. He was strong. But when I became an adult, I don't know whether it's because he was aging, but when I became an adult, I came to realize at that point that he really wasn't that strong. As strong as I thought he was. He wasn't that strong to me as from an adult standpoint. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't even all that wise as I thought he was. But I'll tell you one thing he did do well. He realized his weakness. And you know what he would say to me? He would say, Joan, or he would say, when the kids were around, he would say, kids, I am not your father. And then we would be sitting there going, what? What are you talking about? And I, we just thought, oh, he doesn't know how to speak English very well, so whatever, But what he would say is, he would say, I'm not your father. And then he would say, your real father is in heaven. That's what he would say. And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but I now understand what he was saying. He's saying, I am weak. I don't have all the answers. Your true father, who is truly strong, who is truly wealthy, and is truly wise, is in heaven. And he directed me to him. And that is what he did well. So fathers, don't feel like you have to have all the answers. Don't feel like you have to always be the strong one. What's truly important is that you are able to direct your children and people to the one who is truly strong and truly good and wise. So, here are a few takeaways, quickly. In the presence of Jesus, all arguing ceases. And that is why we have to, more than anything, direct people to the presence of Jesus, to experience Jesus and his person directly. Because that will do more than all the arguing that you can do. Number 2, in the presence of Jesus, there is healing and hope. Number 3, in the presence of Jesus, he covers our shortcomings. Do you feel like you don't have enough heavenly currency to buy things in heaven's miracle store. In the presence of Jesus, He covers what you lack. Isn't that great? You go to buy something